So today's class is going to be about something which has kind of been in the background all semester, but we're going to be looking at more closely, which is language. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the ways in which we can use language, or others can use language in manipulative ways to try to get you to do things or to understand them in ways that are, you will understand them one way. What they're saying is technically true, but they can mislead you by the words they use, etc. So first off, language. We don't pause and think about it that often, but it really is really cool. What language essentially is, it's mind control. It's literally Professor X style. I put thoughts into your head and get you to think what I want you to think. I am across the city, across the country, depending on where you are from you right now. And all I'm doing is moving my mouth and making sounds come out. And that's somehow, like, I can say like pink octopus, and now you're thinking of a pink octopus. Like, that's pretty remarkable. Not only that, with language, you're able to say things and get other people to think things that no one has ever thought before, simply using the words of a language. So anyone think they can come up with a sentence that no one else has ever said before, and yet we'd all be able to understand? It's a fun game to play. Rats prefer to eat unicorns to eating dragons because unicorn meat has a higher fat content. No one has ever said that sentence before, but you all understand exactly what I mean. Like, that's pretty cool. Like, you're all now thinking exactly the crazy thought I just wanted you to think. Like, that is a miraculous sort of thing. And the reason why is because of the way language works. Basically, any sort of language, you've got words, and then you've got the syntactic rules. And all these things are, the words are things that are meaningful. And then the rules are just the rules that we all know to combine the words together into larger meaningful strands. So as long as you know the rules of the language and you're familiar with the words, you can understand things that have never been said before. And that's a really remarkable, interesting thing. But because of the nature of language, there's also ways in which it can be used manipulatively by exploiting the nature of these things themselves. So what we're going to really be focusing on today are the power of words and the way in which words can be used in ways to get people to think one thing when you're really saying something else. And these are, politicians are typically the most stereotypically best at this. The stereotype of the slimy politician is someone who's able to say something knowing that they're not technically lying, but misleading you in a very particular way. So why are they able to do this? How is this possible? Well, there's a few different things that are worth highlighting. And you do kind of start off by talking about the nature of words and the nature of meanings, because you can't really understand how you can exploit these things without understanding what they're like. And so this is going to be fast, effective, not 100% true, but heuristically accurate description of words and the parts to them and what we mean. So words, generally speaking, if I put up a word like this, what makes this a word? Or what is there to this? Or if I were to say it out loud, cat. What parts intuitively does the word cat have? What makes it up? First off, how do you know I just said cat?
Because we heard you say it.
You heard me say it. So what was it specifically? What was it to hear that? There's letters written down, or in the spoken variety, what is it?
We heard the word.
You heard the word, or if we don't want to use the word in our definition, what did you hear? If you were to say something happened, what was it? A sound. There's basically a sound. each word has a sound component to it. And specifically, I mean, we could break this down and get super scientific, but nobody wants me to go into phonology. I'm the only one of us who would find it interesting. You would all fall asleep and it'd be terribly boring. But basically, we hear little sounds like k, t, we hear them together, they make bigger sounds. But not every sound is a word. So like isn't a word. Kerplunk is kind of a word, but plouk isn't a word. Ploink isn't a word. Isn't a word. What makes cat a word while these other ones are not? What is it that cat has?
It has a definition.
It has a definition, or it has a meaning. So what is the meaning of cat? Simply put, well, one way to think about it is, what can you talk about with cats? Like, when I say cat, what can I talk about using the word cat? Give you a clue.
Cats.
Cats, yeah, you can talk about cats using the word cat. So there's this sound component and a meaning component. Now, meanings are complicated. They're very complicated. They're very messy. Within philosophy, what is meaning, there's an entire field within philosophy of language, and most of the time what people argue about is meaning, what it is and where it comes from and yada yada. But at a basic level, you can think of meaning as basically having two different components. You can think of it as having a denotation and a connotation. Now, these are really fancy ways of basically saying the denotation are the things that the word picks out, or the things it refers to, or the things it denotes, or the things that if you were to say that's a so-and-so, you'd be correct. What you're saying is true. The connotation is rather the more emotional or the more gray area, feeling-y. It's not a matter of what you're talking about, but it's more a matter of how you're talking about it. So the way to tell the difference between denotation and connotation is you can talk about things that have the same denotation, but have different connotations. So a classic case of this would be anything where there's the polite way of saying something and the slang or impolite way of saying something. So, if I were to say something like, it's very hard to think of ones in which these come apart without your mind going into something which is not appropriate to talk about in class, because the most common cases we have is you've got the scientific definition for a particular activity and the term you use with your friends. They pick out the same thing, like intercourse is going to have the same denotation as any other one of the words you could say, but they have very different connotations. What are some others that people can think of? A denotation versus a connotation. Things that have the same denotation but different connotations.
What about like supper?
Supper versus like dinner might be a case in which like dinner sounds a little more formal. Like you would have dinner with the queen, but you wouldn't have the queen over for supper. And you certainly wouldn't have the queen over for nosh. Like the queen doesn't nosh. You wouldn't have her over for nom 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 nom. Like the queen doesn't nom 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 nom. You nom nom nom, your friends nom nom nom. You can go out for nom noms, but you don't go out you can go fine dining with the queen. So that would be a case, denotation is the same, the meal or the eating process, while the connotation is different. Any others people can think of? Andrew.
What about the like private parts of people?
Yeah, private parts is another good one. I mean, go on Urban Dictionary, have a field day. Nicole.
I was thinking something slightly different, like the word blue, like it could be like being sad, or it could be like the descriptive color.
So this is actually something we're going to come back to in a second, which is what is typically called ambiguity, which is, this is actually a really great transition. Another thing that can happen is, so sometimes what you have is you've got a particular sound that is associated with multiple different meanings. Sometimes these are things, so like blue versus blue, where blue as in the color or blue as in sad, or you could even throw in the music, the blues. Like all of these are, they have the same pronunciation and same spelling, but they have multiple meanings. So in these sorts of cases, what we've got is a case in which one sound can be associated with multiple different meanings. You can also, though, have different sounds where the denotation is the same, but the connotation is different. So the reason I'm trying to carve this up in this way is to see the various different sorts of variations you can have. So since we're here, anyone got any other ambiguous words they want to throw up here? Because there's millions of them in any language. Not actually millions, there's thousands, but there and there. So here's a tough thing about language, which is spelling is and you'll hear this more from me when it's paper time. Spelling is stupid. I hate spelling. I can't do it, and it's dumb, and it's totally arbitrary. Does anyone know where the spelling of most English words come from? It was this guy named Dr. Samuel Johnson just decided he wanted to make a dictionary, and he arbitrarily chose how to spell things. And now that's how we have them. So, just one guy decided, here's how we're doing it. Because up until then, you were allowed to spell things however you wanted. So it's completely arbitrary. It's dumb. So spoken wise, there, and there all sound the same. If we just concentrate on the spelling, or the sounds, they're completely ambiguous. But the moment you put them on a page, technically speaking, they're not. It's messy. But you could also do like blue and like the wind blew. That would also be another case in which, depending on how you say it, it's ambiguous or not. But to avoid worrying too much about the spelling one. So yes, Elio, you're correct. There and there are ambiguous when you say them out loud. But in a text message, they're ambiguous too, because who gives a crap about spelling in that? But when one of your professors who really cares about grammar comes along, they're not the same. Which again, why language is confusing and messy, and spelling is dumb. All right, what are some others though that we have that we can go with? Try to keep them the exact same spelling, but if you don't have the same spelling, not the end of the world. What are some others we have?
Jam.
Jam.
Like traffic jam, and then like the food.
Versus, there's actually, and we can also throw up like, your song back when like we could go out and dance and things like that. Your jam could come on, and you've got your friend who's like, yeah, that's my jam. So that one too. Mouse. Mouse is another one. We've got, the little things that run around in your apartment and the things that you stick into your computer. Any others people want to throw up here? Bat is one. You've got the things that baseball players use and the things that fly around. Supposedly there was a famous time in baseball back. My dad is old and he loves to tell this story. He was watching a baseball game once. Somebody hit the ball with their bat and a bat flew by and they hit the bat. Yeah. Fat and fat would be another one. Fat as in overweight, and fat as in like, oh, that's fat. Club, another one, like duck club in like, we're going to duck club style versus like the club that you'd hit someone over the head with. All of these are very good cases of ambiguity. So why are we talking about this sort of stuff? Well, because of the fact that somebody who understands the nuances of how words are able to use these sorts of things to manipulate and say things that are inclined to make you think one thing, and really when what they are actually saying or what they know is the truth is different than what they're trying to get you to say. So the first type of case is what is called, what's the best way of putting this? Vague language. So what does it mean for something to be vague? V-A-G-U-E. Anyone know?
Could be interpreted in different ways.
Yeah, it's got a big, messy, fuzzy meaning. Like the number 2 very specific. What does the word to pick out? Two things. But there are other things that have vague meanings where like it's not entirely clear what the person means to get across. And specifically, there are many different things that they could mean. And so an example of this would be some, like love is kind of a vague term because you can have many different things meant by love. Another thing is, that's so great, man. Or everything is wonderful. Like these are the sorts of notions we mean with vague. It's a way to use our terminology. It's that it's got a very wide denotation, and whether something falls into that denotation or not is kind of unclear. So whether a certain word picks out something or what that thing picks out, or if you were to say that's blank, it's not totally always clear whether what you're saying is true. So like that's cool. Like, well, what counts as cool? What doesn't count as cool? It's kind of vague. It's kind of out there. Now, why is it the case that vague language can be used in a manipulative way? What is it that you can do with vague language that allows somebody to say something that could try to trick you or try to manipulate you, or in an argument, they use vague terms to try to get you to do or believe something when what they really know is the case is not quite the same thing. Can anyone think of a sort of case in which you can use vague language to try to get a point across, or to try to get someone to feel or believe something, while in truth knowing that the way they're going to take it isn't true, but there's another way that you could get it across? So one way I'm thinking of is I feel like this always happens in like a superhero movie when somebody's dying. Like somebody's there dying and the other superhero comes along and is like, it's gonna be okay. Well, okay is incredibly vague. So this person comes along and says, it's gonna be okay. How is the person laying there dying interpreting this? What are they thinking in their own head?
They're not gonna be okay.
So the person in their head is terrified, thinking, I'm not going to be okay. I'm afraid. And now and what does it mean for them not to be okay in this case?
Dying?
Yeah, they're dying. So somebody comes along and says, it's going to be okay. What they hear and interpret is, well, I'm not going to die, thank goodness. When in truth, what the other person is saying is just like trying to be comforting and it's not the end of the world to die. It happens to everybody, like at least you're with people who love you and you've got a cool superhero outfit on.
Yeah,
so
I even think that the it's is super big because they say it is going to be okay, not describing what it is that they're referring to initially.
That's a really good point. And I think so, yeah, it's the okay and the it's. Also going to is incredibly vague. Another case in which you have this is people will be incredibly vague with time. They'll say, so Nicole, did you want to say something?
No, nothing. Go on.
Okay. So, a little kid, their mom, a little kid, who am I kidding? When I visit my parents, this still happens. They say, clean up your stuff. And I say, oh yeah, I'm going to. And how do they interpret that? I'm going to take care of it. Don't worry. They interpret it as, it's going to happen sometime in a reasonable amount of time. When in truth, I'm being vague. And what I mean is, at some point in my life, I'll clean up. So this is another way in which you're able to be incredibly general by exploiting the fact that like tense is very vague, or cigarettes don't kill you. This is one in which cigarette companies will say cigarettes don't kill you, and you look at it and you go, well, all the evidence suggests that they are going to cause you to have lung damage if you smoke 47 packs of cigarettes a day, and that's going to kill you. But they'll say something like, oh, no, we meant it won't kill you immediately. So it's going to kill you at some point, maybe, but so this is what we mean by vague language. And you can come up with examples of this in what's the best way of putting this? Vague language, what allows you to do is you can use this vague language to try to get someone to do something like buy your product, when really what you're communicating is, and how somebody's probably going to take it is not at all true, but there is an interpretation of what you say which is true. So for instance, audiences and critics alike rave about our new movie. So this thing here, I mean, we've all seen it on a new movie. Like, it's always on the critics and audiences alike are pumped about the new yada yada. So why am I saying that this is vague? What is it about this that is a vague statement? And why is it that this is vague in a way that can be very manipulative to somebody watching the commercial?
Is it because you don't know if it's positive or negative?
So there's a few different elements. One of it is it could be that they're using rave, when in truth they're raving because like this, how did this movie get made? It's terrible. Don't ever see this movie. Technically speaking, you could say they're raving about it. But what else is the case? So that's one of them, Michael. So that's spot on. What are the other ones? How else is this vague?
I mean, who qualifies as a critic?
That's another thing, is critics and audiences alike rave. Well, what do you count as a critic? Is somebody who has a blog that they, like a 5-year-old with a movie blog who writes, "It's so much fun, I liked the popcorn." Is that a critic? Maybe. The company who did this is certainly going to be able to claim that that's who they're like, we weren't lying. This person, Little George 2012 on Facebook, typed that he liked it and he has a blog, therefore yada yada. What else? Any others? What does it make it sound like? Rating this way, what does it make it sound like percentage-wise? What percentage of audiences are raving about the new movie? Like if you were just to give an estimate.
They make it sound like everyone.
Yeah, they make it sound like most audiences and most critics. But really, as long as you've got like one audience out of, like, as long as 1 out of 1,000 audiences and 2 critics are raving, then it doesn't matter if the other 999 out of 1,000 people and the other 998 critics think it's complete garbage. Technically speaking, because you were vague, and this is why movies are able to do this sort of thing. What are some other, can anyone think of any other sorts of advertising jargon that is able to be vague in this, or is vague in a way that is trying to make their product sound better than it actually is? The best way to think of it is just like the sorts of buzzwords that you'd come across in these sorts of circumstances. How about horoscopes? What is a horoscope? Come on, I know somebody here has read their horoscope at some point in their life. Raph?
Like predictions.
Say that. So Nicole says predictions. Yes, Raph, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I said signs.
Yeah, so it's a prediction about what's going to happen based on your astrological sign or where you were born or what the planets are doing. Whenever you read one of these horoscopes, what do they say? What sorts of things are included? Give me an example of what a horoscope might say. Is it going to say things like, on Saturday at 3:34 p.m., you will get a package from your best friend that will contain yummy candy. Would you ever get a horoscope that says on Saturday at 3:34 p.m. you will get a package from your best friend that will contain yummy candy?
No, it'll probably be like your love life will be optimistic.
Yes, all of which is very vague. Your love life will be optimistic, or it'll be something like something positive will happen to you at some point. I mean, I'm exaggerating somewhat, but it's usually something like you will have a life-changing, you will meet someone that will have a big impact on your life this week. Well, strictly speaking, could be true, but like that's simply because we all meet people. Before COVID isolation, I haven't seen a new human in months. We were meeting new people all the time. So these are ways in which you can, and this is how horoscopes work. They say things that are so vague that they're generally going to be true, like of everybody on a large enough scale. So as long as you can read into it, they are able to get this across. Other things, anything talking about, all natural ingredients. All natural is very vague. And it's designed to make it feel positive. So another way you can think of vague language is that it's something that generally has a positive sort of connotation. But the denotation is very vague and can be interpreted in a way that is very positive. So for instance, all natural our new and improved formula, all natural. Well, technically speaking, do you want to consume everything that's all natural? Like, we can all think of some things that are technically all natural that I don't think any of us want to eat. Nicole?
I mean, I was just gonna say like petrol or something is technically natural, right?
Yeah. Gasoline. If you were to drink gasoline, technically all natural. Grass is very natural. It doesn't taste that bad, but it's also not something that you really need to go out of your way to eat. Toenails, all natural. Your mom's toenails, all natural. You wouldn't want that in your cereal. All of these are ways in which vague language can be used to manipulate you. So when you're watching a commercial or you see an advertisement, you can, just like last week, we were talking about the social psychological pressures that can get you to buy something you might not otherwise buy. They can also use vague language to make you think that something is a good investment or a good purchase. And what they're saying is technically speaking true because something or other within that denotation or something about what they're saying is true. But the way that they expect you to take it is not a true one. So they know you're going to think like, oh yeah, most audiences like it, therefore this movie might be good, or this movie will be good. When really what they mean is somebody likes it, which for every movie is true. The actors in the movie like it enough to get paid to do it, and the director probably thought it was nice, and the movie theaters that are making money off of it, somebody likes the movie. So this is the way in which vague language can be used to manipulate, and how also, if you want to become really good at tricking people without lying, you can use vague language to manipulate. Andrew, is that a question?
Yeah. What about in the instance of like, how the lottery system says $1 in a dream?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's trillions of like options and numbers,
Yeah.
The likeliness of someone to win is.
So that's another case where they say like they're guaranteed winner, or that would be a case in which it's like, well, yeah, it's guaranteed that somebody at some point could win. Or in this case, they try to make it sound like you have much better chances than you do. So, like millions of or hundreds of winners every day, where they leave out the fact that also there's 47,000 losers every day. In the fact that like your lucky numbers, your any sort of these things, they will make you feel very positive about it. Also, any sort of thing where they like interview someone as like real consumers who've used our product say, It's great. Great, what does that mean? You know, like they paid you some money to be on this commercial, so you're really happy with the product. Any of these sorts of things. Get rid of toxins. What is a toxin? Really vague. Anything counts as a toxin if you put it right. Many people love our new product. What counts as many? Depends on who you're talking to and what the circumstances are. They assume you're going to interpret it as most, but in many cases, many can just mean, you know, like 6 people. Other sorts of ways are things, you know, you can think of it in almost like comedy settings of, also any time in which, another way in which you can find this is any sort of case in which someone issues one of those public apologies for misconduct. They always use incredibly vague language, things like, I am so sorry that somebody's feelings were hurt and that or it's never like, I'm sorry that I did X, Y, and Z. It's usually like, I am most upset that my actions caused something to happen which would lead to some issues with somebody's feelings possibly getting hurt. That was never my intention. Like this sort of thing is just vague language everywhere. So these are all cases of vague language. Everyone on board with vague language and how that can be used? All right. The next case is going to be exploiting what Nicole brought up before in terms of ambiguities. So what did we say an ambiguity is in language? We were talking about it before.
Words open to one or more interpretations.
Yeah, so it's more so than just words open to more than one interpretation. It's really better to think of it as words that have multiple different denotations. So sometimes like bank and bank, one of them picks out a river bank, the other version picks out a financial institution. And so what a word that is ambiguous allows you to do is you can theoretically say one thing in one. So what you can do then is, without people realizing it, you can replace one meaning for another. So in an argument of the sorts we're talking about, like a classic denotational or a classic deductive argument from earlier in the semester, what you have, we write it out in language, but really the argument's only good if each word is being used consistently throughout the whole thing. So for instance, this would be an argument that clearly is bad because I'm changing which of the two meanings associated with bank I have in mind. So for instance, 1, I keep my money in the bank. Or I guess people keep money in the bank. 2, the Hudson River has 2 banks. Conclusion: the Hudson River has lots of money. So does everyone see how, if you didn't know that bank had 2 different meanings, you would see this and be like, oh, this is a perfectly valid line of reasoning. This is a sound argument. This is valid because, you know, people do keep money in a bank, and it is true that the Hudson has 2 banks. Therefore, Hudson River has lots of money. But of course, what's the issue here? Why isn't this a good argument? Well, because this meaning of bank and this meaning of bank are different. It would be like saying people keep my money, or people keep money in the financial institution. The Hudson River has 2 sandy sides. Therefore, the Hudson River has lots of money. Clearly, that's a bad argument. So what you can do, and this is what is called, let me erase this. Equivocation. Equivocation is when you're trying to make a point or arguing for something, and you use words that look the same, ambiguous words, but you rely on different aspects of their meaning. So very rarely will you come across a case that is this blatantly equivocating, where like, it's bank and bank, because we all know straight away that this is a terrible argument. But what you will find is sometimes people will use a word that has somewhat related but importantly different denotations. And what they will do is they will think like, oh, this must be the same thing, and reach a conclusion that they shouldn't. So can anyone think of a case, before I put up the case that I want to bring up, of equivocating that either you've come across in the news or you've come across in reading or any sort of thing, in which what somebody does is they say something that relies on a word that has two different meanings with the same sound pattern as the same letters. And by exploiting that, they're able to make a certain conclusion look true, even though it is not.
Waterproof and water resistant.
Waterproof and water resistant is a very good one. So waterproof and water resistant. So this isn't technically speaking quite an ambiguity, because those are different phrases, but what they do turn on is the fact that people assume that you're talking about the same thing in those cases. So what people will do is, waterproof and water resistant aren't technically ambiguous because they are different words, but it captures the right idea, which is waterproof keeps out all water. This coat is water resistant. Conclusion: this coat keeps out all water. So this is something which someone generally thinks, and this is why companies use the phrases waterproof and water resistant, which are very similar and in your mind have the same denotation. But in truth, these pick out different things. Waterproof means it keeps out all water. Water resistant just means it keeps out some water. So if you're wearing a water resistant coat, you're still probably going to get slightly wet. You still need an umbrella. So this is a good case in which words that it would be even clearer if we had cases in which these were spelled the exact same way, but this is the same general idea. Another one is, does anyone remember from early on in the life cycle of COVID, there was a old couple from Arizona who proceeded to eat fish cleaning chemicals, and one of them died and the other went in a coma. Do people remember this news story? It was literally, this couple drank some fish cleaning, like literally for cleaning out fish tanks. They drank this stuff, which was poison. Why did they do this? Well, here was the issue. What was Trump and others saying was the chemical that was going to help with COVID and make you safe? Hydrochloroquine. Well, it actually turns out that hydrochloroquine is a chemical term which actually picks out several different chemicals, in the same way that, like, let's say gasoline would pick out, there are different types of gasoline, or fuel. You can pick out diesel fuel, or it can pick out gas, like petrol fuel. Well, hydrochloroquine picks out a couple different things. One of them was this medicine which is used for malaria, which humans can take, and was supposedly at the time going to help you with COVID. The other type is used to clean fish tanks. It is a chemical that cannot be ingested and is used to clean fish tanks. So here is how these old people reasoned and how they ended up in the hospital. They thought, one, hydrochloroquine helps with COVID. Two, this fish cleaner or fish tank cleaner is hydrochloroquine. Conclusion, I should drink this fish tank cleaner. So at first glance, their argument might look fine. Hydrochloroquine helps with COVID. Also, this fish tank cleaner is hydrochloroquine. Therefore, I should drink it. But they made the terrible mistake of not realizing that this denotation is different from this one. There are two types of hydrochloroquines. There's the type that you use for malaria, and there's the type you clean fish tanks from. If you use this one to clean a fish tank, it's not going to work. And if you use this one to clean or to try to cure malaria or COVID, you die. So that's a classic case of equivocation, where in this case, nobody was trying to manipulate them. It's just that they didn't realize that the word that was spelled the same picked out two different types of chemical. It had two different denotations. So does this sort of reasoning make sense to people? What this is, what this notion of equivocating is?
Wait, so professor, this chemical had two reasons or two components?
No, so what it was is it was two different forms. So basically, I'm not a chemist, but basically the long story of it is, in chemistry, you will often use the same term for chemical structures, molecular structures that fall within the same family but are not exactly the same. So the molecular structure of these had a lot of similarities, but they have some slight differences as well. And those slight differences are not enough to not both be versions of hydrochloroquine. However, they were enough to have vastly different effects on human beings. Another way of thinking about it is like sugar. There are multiple different types of sugar. There's sucrose, there's fructose, there's glucose. They're all similar enough to be called sugar, but chemically speaking, they are different enough to have different effects on the human body. So glucose is what's in your blood sugar, fructose is what's in fruit, and sucrose is like processed sugar that you would use in baking. And they have different effects. Like taking pure glucose is processed differently than sucrose and fructose are. So in the same way, this thing which went under the name hydrochloroquine, and this thing that went under the name hydrochloroquine were different enough that they had different effects on the body, but they both were similar enough, chemically speaking, to be called hydrochloroquine. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. And it's often the case with these sorts of things where like general terms, like toxins, can very often you mean one thing with it and then change it to another thing. You can imagine a little kid using, this is a famous one amongst little kids. Remember back in the day when you had to specify whether you liked someone or you liked someone? I feel like a classic way of teasing someone is they ask you, do you like so-and-so? And you think what they mean is, do you find them an okay person? And you say, yes, I like them. And then all your friends go, ooh, you've got a crush on so-and-so. That's another case of equivocation. You're changing one meaning of like with the other meaning of like, which was I feel like English needs a term different than like for kids to use when describing who has a crush on who. Any other questions on equivocation in this case? And you can think of cases in which, so the book has an example of an advertisement that literally uses this sort of reasoning. They'll say something like, the human body needs sugar to survive. That's why our candy is made with 25 more grams of sugar. Well, those are two different types of sugar. We need glucose to survive. We don't need the processed sugar that's in candy. Also, any sort of thing in which, I'm trying to think, what are some other ones? Humans need to socialize to survive. Therefore, come to our club. Well, socialize here is being used in one way, like actually interact with people, versus a second way, which is like the social scene sort of way. One thing to highlight, which will come up in the homework a little bit, is sometimes vagueness and equivocation, they can blend into each other. So don't worry too much if in the homework where I ask you to find an equivocation case, if it's also vague, that doesn't mean your case is wrong. If I ask you to find a vague case and you find equivocation, doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. So just keep that in mind. All right. Everybody on board with these general sorts of things? We doing all right? All right. Let me take a sip of water so I don't pass out. Raph, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I said yes.
Any other points before I get to the last one, which is euphemism? How many people are familiar with the word euphemism? Anybody? Or euphemistic? The way to think of a euphemism is that it's a way of saying something or referring or denoting something in a way that is less forceful than the typical way in which you'd be talking about it. So a way of thinking about it is a euphemism is a case in which you want to talk about a particular denotation, but you want to do it in a way with a less forceful connotation. And you do this in a way so that you can talk about very problematic or harmful things without setting off somebody's upset. So a classic case is died versus passed away. So these refer to the exact same thing. However, why do we have both these phrases? Why are there two of them? Why don't we just always say died? Why do we have passed away?
Respectfully to the other person.
Yeah, it's a sensitivity thing. A way of thinking about it is died is in some sense, it has a stronger connotation. While passed away is in some sense less forceful. So if you're trying to be kind, you exploit this difference in connotation to try to help someone's feelings out. Other sorts of cases are, well, does anyone have any other euphemistic sorts of phrases that they're familiar with? Fired and let go. Yes, we have to let you go means the exact same thing as you're fired or you're sacked. But a company will say let go because it's a less forceful way. And the goal here is to try to make it feel less bad. At the end of the day, being fired sucks, but the company is going to try to make it seem less bad to you by saying, I'm sorry, we have to let you go. So this is another good one. Any others people want to go with? So in a lot of cases, as these ones show, a lot of times we use euphemisms in order to be like for positive reasons. Euphemisms exist in order to, in a lot of cases, we use them in order to be polite or to be kind. If you don't want to say a dirty word in front of your grandmother, you might use a euphemism for it. If you don't want to be rude in front of small children, you might find another way of saying it. All of these are for positive reasons. However, euphemisms can also be used for negative reasons. They are used sometimes to try to get people to not be as upset about something as they would if you used another term, thereby manipulating them into agreeing to something that they'd never agree to if you used a different term. So politics is famous for this sort of thing. Can anyone think of any from politics? Things in which politicians say something in a very roundabout way in order to try to get something accepted by the population that if you use the more common term, no one would ever accept. I'll put one up here. Revenue enhancement. What is revenue enhancement? How many of you would agree to, a politician putting in place a system of revenue enhancement? Sounds rather innocuous. Michael, or Mike.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, that sounds positive. Revenue enhancement goes up.
But what is it? What is another way of referring to this? We can play hangman. What is, taxes. How many of you want your taxes to go up? A program of revenue enhancement, a politician will say that knowing that people won't get as upset. The moment they say we're raising your taxes, all of a sudden people might not agree to that. Another classic one is collateral damage. What is collateral damage? How many people have heard this phrase? Anybody? It's often used. Yeah, Roy? Do you know what it means?
Yeah, no, but yeah. Collateral damage means someone who got also, I guess, affected, but wasn't directly the one that was supposed to be affected.
Exactly. And it's very often used in a military or policing context. Generally, what collateral damage is a civilian who is harmed by a military strike who was not the target. So really, collateral damage is very often used in military circumstances to say things like, there was some, the mission was a success. However, there was some collateral damage. That makes it sound like it was a great success. But what collateral damage usually is a nice way of saying is children are blown up. Complete innocents are killed. Hundreds of people who didn't deserve it died. This is a way in which a politician can say things like, there was collateral damage, and make it sound like it's not a big deal, because we don't have strong feelings about a word like collateral damage. Eyes melting out, that's something we have very strong feelings about. So if you say something like, there was an episode at the power plant, well, that episode at the power plant could mean that there was a nuclear reaction meltdown and somebody's eyes melted out. But you put it into the connotation of episode, and all of a sudden you can get things past people which they wouldn't otherwise agree to. So things like moderate side effects. Moderate side effects is something which, sounds rather okay, or at the very least, like, you're left wondering like what these moderate side effects are. But like the moment they say incredible amounts of vomiting, you're gonna get another feeling. So this is another way in which euphemisms often go hand in hand with vagueness. So you will very often use a vaguer term as a euphemism for a more specific phrase. So passed away. Well, where did they pass to? Did they just get on a boat and sail away? Well, no, we know what death is, but by saying passed away, we get a different sort of circumstance here. There was one other one I wanted to talk about in terms of, and this one kind of to show the way in which vagueness and euphemism go hand in hand. I want to finish off by discussing, this was a news story, I want to say it was before COVID, so like 18 months ago. There was this situation in which Apple and Amazon and Google all got in trouble because their voice activated assistants ended up listening in on people. And so the way in which this happened is that their argument was that, so the full background was, it turned out that there were, whenever you turned on Siri or you said, "Hey Alexa," and it turned on, and for those of you who have an Alexa in your house, and I just said, "Hey Alexa," I apologize for just turning on your Alexa. So apologies, but basically what they were doing is there were rooms full of people who were listening in live to the recordings that were coming in from these various different devices. And so you might wonder, like, why is this a problem? Who cares about this? Well, can anybody guess when these sorts of devices were turning on? Can anyone take any guesses as to why it became a news story? Think about yourself. When wouldn't you want your SIRI or ALEXA turning on and listening in with somebody on the other end in headphones listening to your movements? Think about
Privacy
time.
issue.
Pardon?
Isn't it a privacy issue?
Yeah, it was a privacy issue. And specifically, I'll give you like a little background. There was this one problem where it turned out that the sound of an unzippering zipper, Siri was too sensitive and would turn on to the sound of zoop, because zoop sounded like Siri. So you can imagine circumstances in which people wouldn't want strangers listening in shortly after a zipper was unzipped. Another case, they one time listened in on a drug deal because somebody happened to have a name similar to Siri at a like an illegal drug deal. These are all cases in which, give me a second, I gotta plug in my computer before it dies. These are all cases in which these sorts of privacy issues came up. And what happened was Apple, Amazon, and Google all said, we did nothing wrong here. You all signed a terms of service agreement that allowed us to do this. And then when people looked at the terms of service agreement, what they found was that in this agreement, there was this incredibly euphemistic, vague phrasing, which was, I agree to allow company to record or to collect data for quality control purposes. So when you read this, like, nobody thinks that when they're signing a terms of service, and they agree to allow a company to collect data for quality control purposes, that what they were signing away was their right to let strangers listen in on their intimate moments. And this was a case in which Google and Amazon had built into the terms of service this euphemistic, vague language to get people to agree to something that, if it were put in the terms, we will allow anytime your Siri goes off, a room full of strangers could listen in on whatever it is you're doing and take notes, nobody would agree to that. By putting it in a euphemism, they were able to get people to agree and sign off on these terms of service that they wouldn't otherwise be willing to do. So, to summarize, language is a really cool, powerful, borderline magical tool we all have in our everyday lives. If you ever want me to go on a tangent, just ask me a question about language and I'll go off for like an hour because I find it the most fascinating thing in the world. But the very things that make language so powerful and flexible can be exploited by people who want you to do something that might not be in your best interest. And in particular, they can exploit ambiguities, which are cases in which there's a single sound associated with multiple different meanings, and they can equivocate between them. They can they can rely on the vagueness of the terms, where the denotation is very broad, and there's a more common understanding and a less common understanding. And what they're relying on is for you to take the more common one and therefore agree to something when really what they had in mind was the less common one, the time in which, or you might mistakenly think that there's one type of hydrochloroquine when there are two. And then finally, in cases of euphemism, where you rely on the fact that people are like certain connotations better than others to talk about something that is harmful and sneak something back past someone that is not in their best interest or that they'd never agree to if they fully understood what that word meant. So any questions on this? Comments, concerns, feelings, worries, anything? All right. That's all I needed to say. The homework for next week is literally just another one of these. Go on the internet and find these examples of this. If you have any questions, reach out. Again, there will be some overlap between them. So I'm not going to be super strict about making sure that you have one that is a perfect example of vagueness and only vagueness. Just the real key is going to be in the explanation, and it's COVID, so I'm going to be grading it rather loosely. So don't stress too much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If there are no more questions, I'll see you all next week. And good luck with the homework, and have a good week, everybody.
Have a good week.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor.